Welcome, everybody. It's a great Monday morning to be able to talk about some fun stuff, kind of create a fuss, get an argument, get things really going here, talking about Metaverse, that term that nobody uses anywhere, right? It's highly abused everywhere. But, the whole thing here, what we're going to do for these next few days is we're going to try and bring an ounce of reality to some of this. Not just talk about what is the beautiful fanfare going to be, but what does it really take to actually get this done. We're going to talk about a lot of crucial areas that people haven't really thought much about, or they're not thinking about, because there's so much encompassing on when we say this ubiquitous term metaverse that is supposed to be everything and anything. So let's kind of take a minute. Let's explore. For those who don't know me, although I think I know almost everybody in here, which is great to see these faces. I'm Royal O'Brien, the General Manager of Digital Media and Games. The guy who's kind of taking on this Metaverse side of it for at least for open source and trying to create a voice in open source, because open source really is a critical element of this. When we think about Metaverse, who's going to be building things? It's not just going to be where, hey, we're using all licensed software to do all licensed things to do everything. We've seen this already in the past. I mean, who in this room doesn't have a phone on them? Yeah, congratulations, you're using open source too. Every one of you. And so it's that much a part of everything that we do in our life. So what is it? Well, it's a dream, it's an idea, but it's really not here today. Okay, that's the reality. Everybody likes to throw it around and say it's here. It's not. Okay, and we know it's not. But it could be something as impactful as the web. That's what really drives people. Okay, it's not the fact that, it's not here, but when the web came around and people saw this rush, they're going, hey, it's the second time we're going to do this. And I get it. Some people think I have a second chance to make a lot of money and to do a lot of amazing things. So yeah, it's getting a lot of fanfare because of the potential that we saw happen once before. So we're talking about something that really is kind of an ever-changing, a persistent, immersive experience. And it exists between and inside of the digital and real worlds. And that's something to really pay attention to when I say that it's between both digital and real, because you're going to have players on both sides. You're going to have people with their phones doing AR experiences, and you're going to have people in VR headsets doing immersive experiences between them. So it is going to touch both worlds. It's not stuck in one. So something to kind of consider in that. So how do we get there? This is an iterative puzzle. There is no silver bullet here, okay? And we have a lot of pieces to this puzzle, but we need to bring them together to actually form this coined term metaverse before it actually becomes a reality. And so we have to be realistic. When you look at this, we're not going to land at this amazing Ready Player One tomorrow, okay? It's going to look ugly the first time. Just like the web browsers the first time, they look pretty ugly. They were pretty much textbooks, right? Compare where we started when we had, Mozilla and we were doing things with Netscape and we were doing, old school stuff compared to what we have now with all the JavaScripts and interactivity, and it's amazing, right? I mean, if some of you remember Shockwave, that was like, oh man, that's going to be the best thing going on. Everybody's going to build a Shockwave page, right? It was amazing. Yeah, you don't know what the future will be, but you know what you want it to be. And we're doing it again. So at the end of the day, it's going to be small feats of technological success. It really is what this will be. And as we do these and achieve these small feats, they start to come together and become what we want them to be. So what are the things I expect to be seen? Well, it's the interaction of what you see, you hear, you feel, but it's not in a single bubble. This isn't Zuckerberg's Facebook metaverse, because that's just one experience, like it's one page. So you have to consider that. So we're talking about the richness. Some of the things we'll want to be is, what I see in one experience, I might see as pieces in another experience. Think about it. When you have your identity of who you are, you want that identity to carry with you. People see you in a game, they know who you are. They know what you do. So you create these kind of identities. And you want to be able to bring and share kind of the experience elements to others in an experience. I want a trophy, I got a car, I got a guitar, I got something from one experience. I want to share them into another. That creates that, that social element of what we're doing between these experiences that are not related to each other. So that's when we start breaking the bubble. The immersion. You have to travel from experience to experience. So when you're actually in your web browser, right, you go to the web page, you open up a page. How many of you shut your browser down just to open up a new page? Probably none of you. So why would we be doing the same thing? Why would you break immersion because you have to go somewhere else? So you have to be able to seamlessly travel without that disruption. And you've got to be able to kind of have those visible identity assets when you travel. You know what I mean? I like to have a big purple cape on me. Well, people expect when they find me, I have a purple cape. Why did I choose purple? No idea. I'm probably looking at his jacket. But It's that identity that people see me, they know me when I traverse around, that I feel like I'm a part of something. And that is a big element if we look at what's going on in trending today. People want to be a part of something. And then, of course, sharing. That feedback of experiences, how you're actually sharing these things with each other. And most importantly, a footprint in the snow. I was here. I did something. Okay? And there's a line between graffiti and a footprint in the snow. But that's not for us to define. Okay? That's for how the people will use it. The kids that are 8 years old, 12 years old, 16 years old. This technology is not necessarily for us, but it's for that generation who is sitting with a tablet or a screen or something right in their field of vision, chewing up a good 45 to 50 degrees of it. That's not far-fetched from them as they get older. Matter of fact, that's the norm. And so think about how they will use it when you're thinking about your use cases. So what are some of the core areas we need to solve for? We need to think about users. We need to think about experience. We need to think about interaction, scale, and transactions. These are really the 5 core areas. And you'll find that all the talks that we have today relate to each one of these areas. We have to nail all of these to actually get there. Without it, it kind of gets lost. So let's talk about users. For starters, who are you? I need your identity. I can't do anything unless I know who you are. So we're looking at a distributed model where the experiences can kind of quickly identify users. We have centralized and decentralized. Everybody's heard these terms thrown around, right? When you go to an experience, more likely it will be centralized. These are the things that are specific to that company, to their experience, their intellectual property. But there are pieces that they're going to want to allow from their centralized experience to go out into other worlds. That's where it becomes decentralized. When things have to traverse, only the limited number of things have to traverse, they become the decentralized parts. So the reality is this is not all decentralized, and it's not all centralized. You've got to look at where the IP will go and what needs to traverse to determine what becomes decentralized and what becomes centralized. So you have to be able to identify, though, who you are. How do I know that you can actually have those things? Where did you get them? How did that happen? So identity is important. And then, of course, this means that your identity is not something that's just held by a company, but it reverses that model where you have your identity. Now, whether you decide to use Google or someone else to host your identity, that's another topic. Or you decide you want to run your own server that can respond to an identity request. But it can't just be owned by the endpoint of the companies. It's got to be turned around because you're going to be traversing in and out of those. We do it already today. Everybody has either a Google or a Microsoft or a different identity on each one of these. But we're going to have to go a little bit further because the experiences are going to demand it for immersion. You can't just pop up like, hey, you want to log into your Google browser thing again? That's going to be pretty rough if you were trying to chase and hunt someone down from one place to another. And then the proper disclosure of the information. When you go to a bar or you go somewhere and they ask you for ID, do they really care about your driver's license number? The only concern there is, how old are you? Does the picture match? So it's important from an identity perspective that these things are actually taken into account because now we're talking about privacy, disclosure. So those are important elements that we have to think about. Without these pieces, it becomes tough to navigate inside of a metaverse. Authorization. Is it really you? Okay? When you did your authorization to say, hey, this is my identity, but I authorized who I am, we have to look at the models that actually says it's really you. And this means it has to exist across both centralized and decentralized environments. Okay? It can't be where one of these companies owns that authorization factor. It's got to come into play. These have to be fluid. Without it, you basically have someone controlling it. If you remember something going back in time, the internet for the longest time, right? Does everybody remember when you had that thing with AT&T and Comcast where they were trying to control the bandwidth of certain sites, where they can control which ones have fast bandwidth and which ones have slow bandwidth? Imagine the impact on the internet if that would have actually happened. We would have a handful of AOLs and a lot less immersive environment. So that's why I bring up this point of centralized and decentralized, because that's an important piece of what we're trying to do. And then, of course, you've got to be able to have a token or context that allows your authentication to carry across so that we know that really is you, and this is your identity, and this is how we're doing it. And then exposure. What kind of content? Do I really want a child going into an adult area? Well, at least if I know the authorization and the identity, then it's reliable that whoever has the experience can make a decision and say, no, you're not supposed to be in here, where it can be controlled from that point. Right now, if you type a bad word in a browser, you will get all the bad things that you don't want to see. And you can put all the protection pieces you want in place and none of them's going to work because you're still going to get something. So this gives that ability for at least companies to make decisions. Now, whether they do it or not is another topic, but it's something we have to take into consideration. In the experience, simulation. This isn't a regular web server, okay? That digital clock that's going to be tick-tocking, sending back packets. Hey, I'm here. Yes, you're there. Hey, they're there. Hey, I'm here. That's got to happen. The next generation of these web servers, they got to track position, time, action, simulation of events. They're going to make these things operate. So they're not just web servers. And they'll either update, some people think you have to update them in 60 times a second, okay? We're not all playing Call of Duty. Some people don't realize that like a game like World of Warcraft, which millions of people play, they send 12 per minute, or 12 per second. So we don't need this ridiculous number of updates. Your experience will dictate it, but that server that you build has to have this in accommodating for this. And then the layers of it. You really don't expect you're going to walk into 100,000 people. Could you actually identify somebody in 100,000 people? So there's going to be a context play here. Who will you see in your layers that you should be seeing? Servers have got to be able to expose who they are so that you'll know who you'll see and what makes sense. And more of an open standards approach so that experiences can understand other experiences. One really cool example a friend of mine at Microsoft always brings up, ideal thing that we'd love to see in a metaverse is where I have two experiences. I have one with a trebuchet and the other one with a basketball hoop. And the idea is, how can I get the trebuchet to shoot a ball from one experience into another to get to the basketball hoop? Without the standards to get them to understand what a ball is, what are the physics model, and how could they actually traverse across, they will never speak, and it will never happen. And you'll have 5,000 competing standards. So this is where open source and open standards can at least help define when I say, I am an experience, I am a right-hand Cartesian system, and I have a physics system like that. At least if I have a clue if I can be compatible, I have a chance. Without it, there is no chance. It's not going to happen. So 3D assets and objects, the consistency, again, open standards approach, GLTF, USD, there's so many of them out there. I'm actually doing a talk on this one myself, kind of digging deep into what we have to deal with. But without it, you really don't expect everybody to break out an installer and install a program for every single experience, do you? Like, I'm going to install the Facebook installer, and I'm going to install the Google installer, and it's never going to happen. It's got to be seamless. When you go to a web page, people don't realize that, yes, I went to this web page, but there were like 15, 20 JavaScript programs that actually got loaded in the background that you seamlessly shifted from one to another when you saw that Facebook comments page at the bottom, which was some linked JavaScript that actually tied back into their system. So we need to be that seamless to be able to do that with our assets and our objects. Scene assembly. What's it going to look like? We lived in a world with VRML. Are we doing it again? What is that going to look like? Is that USD's job? Is it the right tool for the job? So we have to know how we can create that kind of compatible scene assembly that can handle those kind of things and build these environments without. By doing that, we can create common libraries. Common libraries can allow different companies who are building their solutions and building their experiences to at least use this as a common ground so that we bridge that gap and be able to move seamlessly. This is all part of that seamless experience. And then object relationships and shared elements, haptic and video. Remember that when you look at the character, look at yourself. You have your body, but then you have your hair, earrings, necklace, clothes, shoes. These are all accessories that have to have a relationship to your body. Your shoes don't fit on your head. Okay? But if you don't have that relationship for the objects, nor can I share them, nor place them, nor do anything correctly. So you've got to consider that it's more than what the composite it is, but what the breakout of the elements. Because when Nike decides they build an NFC or a digital NFT, and they decide to build a digital piece for your shoes, and everybody wants to wear the shoes, where do I place the shoes, man? Where do they go? So relationships matter. Interaction, if you're immersive, even if you're on your phone, do you really expect to break out a keyboard? Probably not. So now you're talking about voice-driven activation, and being able to do that kind of communication. But, to do the immersive pieces, but the security and control, who gets to hear your voice? Who gets to record your voice? Who gets that data? Is it big business? Where does that go? These are things that we have to look at that are really, really important for that data information. And having an open standards approach kind of allows that interoperability when I'm communicating. It's not far-fetched to think that you will be in two experiences at once. And that's maybe a third generation thing, but having these type of standards when we're going across them, you're talking to a friend, hey, let's go over here. Is it, hey, let's go over here as you crossed over a boundary? You want that to be able to carry seamlessly. You want to be able to hear a certain number from one place to another. This is something that will help drive that for these seamless experiences that we want to get to. Artificial intelligence. Let's face it, it's going to be an empty place in the beginning, and we need to fill it. And AI will be able to do that, filling it with void, interactable objects, things that can change that you can't tell, but also altering that experience, how it changes, what it'll be like. You know, we're talking about the metaverse continually changing. AI is going to have a big factor in that. Unfortunately, it's also going to be playing with our minds. So now there's an ethical part of this that comes into play because the impact of human interaction can be drastic. You can literally drive people into depression. You can drive people into excitement. AI will have that ability. So there's an ethics part of this that really needs to be kind of talked about at least. And who are who sets the guardrails behind these agents? We see a lot of these examples where sometimes the AI goes nuts and they're like, we should kill all humans. Let's shut that one off. Well, on the metaverse, that shut-off switch may not exist. So how do we set those rails for that kind of interaction? It's a real deal thing. Scale, what's the edge going to look like? What is that last mile going to look like? How are we going to get it from the last mile to you in a latent sensitive model for these updates and actions? Kind of that massive distributed scale to handle the traffic for each regional area. I'm not going to have 1 billion people from Japan hitting my Atlanta server. So how do I regionalize some of that data and use some of these backbones to coordinate that? And then, of course, the number of updates per client. It's not like a web server where I hit the page, get what I want, and get out. That's not going to happen. So we have people that are constantly updating what's going on. That's got to be localized. And, of course, the distribution of the reusable objects and assets. Kind of a really big piece of that. Cloud, just because we have the edge, we've got to do something with a bigger data lake of what's happening. So connecting these regional areas to larger processing pieces, that's how you're going to create the larger world on its entirety. But also large-scale data mining. These refining of experiences is going to be a lot of stuff happening. You've got to be able to refine that data and do something with it to make a change. We do it all the time in game development. We take a look, we pull data, where did they go, what were their habits, what was going on. Nobody liked going there, they love going here. Guess what? That's going to happen on a massive scale. And then closing the physical geographical gap. You want to not separate cultures by their geography because the internet is latent enough that we can be part of one culture in one area. And so that's one way where cloud can start to close that gap, where the congestion can thrive over dark fiber and back-end connections. And then, of course, the stability and growth trends for some of these experiences as they scale out. Marshmallow starts up a concert. I need to spin up thousands of nodes out of nowhere to be able to keep up with that. Don't think that's not unrealistic because somebody comes out of the blue. I mean, the TikTok, YouTube video, we know that hundreds of thousands of people can jump into a site at any moment in time. You better be ready for it because it can and will happen. And when you don't get it right, you've lost that opportunity to actually commercialize. Okay? I think it would pretty much upset anybody in the room to have missed that mark. Transactions, how do I actually get that Nike thing into their hands? What is a transaction going to look like? What are the databases? So centralized is going to have that view when you transact. I bought that thing because I was part of the Nike experience and I did that. But it's everything within their purview, but how do I get that data out of that database into the decentralized world where others can see that, yes, I actually should be wearing those Nike because I got them, right? And do we use ledgering to do that? And the decentralized, when I get things from user-generated content that wasn't part of an experience, but it's something they built, how does that carry around and allow it to be shown both in and out of these centralized environments? So you've got to think about how that ledgering, I'm not talking about money, I'm just talking about transaction, but I own this thing or I have this thing. I should be carrying it around, it's a part of me. It's important, so we need massive scale on that, especially read access. We can kind of do write access in bulk. Read access is critical behind this. And then, of course, the user controls to determine how they want to be able to host some of these things and how they can become a part of it, especially in the decentralized. Centralized, you're not really going to see that, but it's decentralized, that's going to be a key element behind this. And then, of course, the tracking of the content, licensing, and ownership. Wallets, big piece here. A lot of people use their phones, digital, Google Pay and things like that. It's got to be simplified. The number one problem from all these metaverse games, onboarding. Onboarding on them is a nightmare. Wallets are one of the key things. There's actually one of the talks that will be talking about wallets, open wallets, and how we can get that done. Because, let's face it, if I can't onboard you, it's not going to get very far. Okay, you're limited by the people. So this is a big part of it. It's got to be simple, secure, reliable, using interoperable open source so we don't have one company dictating what the standards are, so that multiple entities can actually use them to bring the adoption and grow it. We know this happens and it works, and we've got to do it without the restrictions of somebody holding us back. Or we're back to that internet conversation of, hey, let's slow the bandwidth down, and you can get through and you can't get through. That's going to kill the experience. And then it's got to be easy to use across both centralized and decentralized environments. FinTech, right? The speed of commerce. We're used to these, transactions going on, but have you ever seen the sheer volume of microtransactions? Okay, I bought my shoes, bought my necklace, bought my digital scarf, I bought a lot of microtransactions. People realize that is massive. And to keep up with that, they're wonderful at communicating. But looking at the open standards that allow them to do more interoperable communication between them and to the end consumer to keep up with this for that scaling demands. Because it's not like we have a lot of $100 purchases, we just have $101 purchases that come in fast. And they've got to be able to keep up with that kind of a system. And the other problem is that you don't want a bunch of companies creating these isolated patchwork systems to kind of, take care of it in the interim. If you have those, you give people an opportunity to build something from that. And so we kind of prevent that incompatible things. They'll happen if we don't do anything about it, period. Doing nothing is way worse. IP rights, briefly kind of talking about this, but content's king. So there's the whole argument. I have these with a lot of different legal firms, and I invited a lot of them to talk about trademarks, the license mark and the associated goods in virtual and real. Like, this really matters. Without content, there's no metaverse. I mean, there's only a limited number of things user content's going to drive. And the infringement, what are the jurisdictions? What are the existing rights? How do I do that quality control, the controls behind them? What's the unfair competition? Personality rights, design rights, all of these things come into play. Personal use defense, right? So how many conversations have you had on these topics of what should be paid attention to? Evidence in use. What's the governing law and forum? I mean, if I'm using stuff over in Japan, I'm in the US, how does this come into play? So something to think about, that these are parts that are important to actually getting this done. And then, of course, a cause of action, and what are the remedies that are appropriate for it? So the big part of the open source community is that I really want to convey to everybody is that, growing with communities, especially like with the Linux Foundation, where we have these synergistic communities. Why is this event, why do we have so many groups in the LF coming to this and doing this? Because they have the disciplines. They've been eating, sleeping, and breathing all of these areas. They've been working on edge. They've been working on cloud. They've been working in AI. They know these spaces great. So why would I want to find kind of self-appointed people who go, yeah, I'm the expert, when we have the experts who've been working in open source in companies that have been using these technologies? So the point of it was, let's bring the communities in instead of pulling them apart and working them to actually build this in their disciplines. People who are great at edge, they don't know about fintech, and people in fintech probably don't know about edge. So why would you ask the question to the wrong group? So that's why we have this with the communities. And you want it built onto standards that can be leveraged for anyone for interoperability. I can't hammer this home too many times. Open standards, interoperability. Got to be able to have that, because without it, it goes left and right. We start reaching a lot of limitations. And it's a way to get to the destination of our unrestricted and usable metaverse, kind of like how we have now on the internet, without all of the fanfare and fantasy. The big part of these sessions are reality. Let's get down to reality. So, like I mentioned before, each one of these different areas of bringing these groups, they kind of form special interest groups. Things that are for fintech, things that are for authentication, things that are for 3D. And having these special interest groups allow those disciplines and the experts to stay focused in their area. And it lets them build the actual solutions. And then you work with a steering committee who kind of sits above that, and they have the use cases that they can actually go after, so that each one is solving it and then coming together. There's nothing worse than having a conversation like, hey, how do we solve this? And there's 50 voices in the room and nobody makes sense because everybody's talking past everyone. So how do we bring those so that you have the thought leaders that have their special interest groups that they can chair and bring them together in a committee to start solving things? And that's part of building a community. That's really important. And when you come together with this community, you're able to create these open source standards and the software references. If you ask somebody, hey, here's a standard but no reference, they kind of look at you sideways. You build a reference, people will grab it and start doing something with it. So it's something to consider. So we have to champion our own destiny. everyone in the room here, even outside, you're the key, okay? I can tell you about all this, but it's really up to everyone in this room to really make it happen. Get involved, contribute the ideas, documentation, code, awareness. All of this is part of it. The less we share, the more we say nothing or grumble about it under our voices, we're just a part of the problem. We have to be part of the solution. And that means argue. Get in there, challenge everything. If something looks funny, don't be quiet about it. Use your voice, put your foot down, because somebody else didn't think about that. Okay, your perspectives mean everything for us to get this done, and it won't just happen overnight. So the bottom line, don't stop talking. That's the number one thing, don't stop talking. The reason why we set these sessions up this way, where we have the first day for all of these pieces for people like me who just run our mouths, is because the next day, we want you to run your mouths in the birds of a feather, where you take a lot of these things, come into the room, and start throwing food. You know, really get into it. Just go at it, because we're going to collect a lot of that. We're going to take a lot of that data, a lot of that conversation, and we're going to start building a lot of these special interest groups so the conversations can keep going. So we can keep having these conversations and grow them in those verticals where the leaders, the thought leaders, and people taking action can do it. So it's really important. That's why it's a two-part piece for every session. The birds of a feather is just as important as the talk itself. So part of the track, if you take a look, we have a lot of exciting people here that'll be doing a lot of things here, you know, from all the different discussions, AI, authentication, all the pieces that I talked about relating to all of those areas. So if there's things that are of interest to you or you want to be a part of, get in there. You know, listen to what they have to say, write some notes, and then be ready to duke it out the next day. That's really the big part of this. So with that said, we have a mailing group that we're actually putting together for this, for people. We'll also be able to send this to people afterwards. But we're wanting to get this conversation not just going once, but also be able to follow it up quarterly and have continual discussions on how we actually build this with each of the communities actually contributing into this. So with that said, thank you.